The first thing I heard was my own key slipping inside the new lock. The second was the sound of a man's voice through the thin apartment wall, low and calm, like he had all the time in the world. I stood in the hallway with 2 cardboard boxes at my feet and one arm wrapped around my ribs where my ex had grabbed me an hour earlier, hard enough to leave my skin buzzing. I wasn't supposed to look back. I had already changed my number, already blocked every account, already told myself this place was the end of him. Then I saw the black sedan parked outside the building again, idling at the curb with its lights off. My fingers tightened around the keys. That was when the door beside mine opened. Not all the way. Just enough. A man in a dark shirt stepped into the dim hall and looked at me without surprise, as if he had been expecting this exact moment. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask why I was shaking. He only shifted one step aside, making room between us and the stairwell, and said, "You should come in before he sees you." I should have refused. Instead, I stared at the brass security keypad beside his door, the kind with a private code, a silent camera, and a second lock that only the building manager and one tenant could control. That was the first thing that told me he wasn't just another neighbor. The building manager's voice crackled over the intercom a second later, suddenly polite, almost nervous, asking if Mr. Romano needed anything from security. Mr. Romano didn't answer right away. He glanced at my boxes, then at the bruise blooming under my sleeve, and for one brief second something in his face softened before it went cold again. He reached out, not to touch me, but to take the heavier box from my hands like he was giving me a choice and not an order. I let him. Inside his apartment, the lights were warm, the windows high and silent, and on the counter sat a single white rose in a glass of water. It was such a small thing that it almost hurt more than if he had put a gun on the table. He noticed me looking at it. "My mother kept one every week," he said, voice quiet, "for the people she couldn't save." Before I could ask what that meant, my phone lit up. One new message from my ex: "I know where you moved." My breath caught. The man beside me saw the screen from across the room, and without raising his voice, he said, "If he comes here, he won't be touching your door again." Then he looked at me like he was waiting to see whether I would run from him too. My hand was still on my phone when I realized I had a choice to make: go back into the hallway alone, or stay with the stranger next door who already knew my fear too well. He didn't move when I lowered the phone. He only glanced once at the screen, then at the door, then back at me, like he was measuring the hallway between my fear and his apartment. "Come in," he said, and this time it sounded less like an order and more like a decision he was willing to defend. I hesitated long enough for the message from my ex to light up again. Then I stepped inside, carrying both boxes because I didn't want him to think I needed rescuing more than I needed space. He noticed. He said nothing. He just closed the door behind me, leaving it unlocked. That small detail landed harder than any promise. In the kitchen, he pushed a chair out with his foot and set my heavier box on the table without opening it. "You can keep your things there," he said. "Or leave." I looked around instead of answering. His apartment was too quiet for a man like him. No music. No television. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the city pressing at the windows. On the counter, beside the white rose, sat a stack of sealed envelopes, all with different names written in careful ink. One had a child's drawing taped to it. Before I could ask, he turned the envelope face down. Not hiding it. Choosing not to explain. That felt different. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. A photo this time, my old building. My front door. Taken tonight. My fingers tightened around the phone, and I saw him see that change in my hand. He crossed the kitchen, stopped one step short of me, and held out his own phone without looking at mine. "Give me the number," he said. I'll have it traced. I shook my head once. Too fast. He accepted it immediately, but the pause between us grew teeth. Then he reached for a notepad, wrote down a different number, and slid it across the table. If you need help, text that one. It goes nowhere except me. The choice was tiny. It wasn't safety. It was trust with a door still open. I took the paper anyway. He saw my hand tremble and, instead of commenting, went to the cabinet and came back with a mug. Tea. Not coffee. He set it in front of me with both hands, then stepped away like he understood how often kindness could feel like pressure. When I wrapped my fingers around the warmth, the phone in my palm went quiet for 1 second, then rang again. This time, the caller ID showed my ex's name. I stared at it. So did he. And when he reached out, I thought he was going to take the phone. Instead, he turned it face down on the table and said, low and calm, "You decide when you answer." Not him. He had just turned my phone face down when 3 sharp knocks hit his door. Not polite. Not random. Measured. He didn't flinch, but something in the room changed anyway. He looked at me once, and then he crossed to the peephole with the quiet caution of a man who already knew the world could turn dangerous in a single breath. On the other side, I heard low voices. One of them was his. Another was unfamiliar. He opened the door only a few inches. A man in a dark coat stood in the hall holding a plain brown envelope, his expression flat and professional. "It's about the building," the man said. "There's been another complaint." My neighbor took the envelope without breaking eye contact. "Not tonight," he said. The words were calm, but the man outside nodded like he'd just been dismissed by someone used to being obeyed. Then my neighbor closed the door and slipped the envelope into a drawer instead of opening it in front of me, like he understood trust had limits and I deserved to keep mine. When he turned back, his gaze dropped to the boxes I still hadn't unpacked. "Can you read those?" he asked, nodding toward the stack near the wall. It was such a small request that I almost missed the point of it. He wasn't asking me to prove anything. He was giving me a reason to stay useful, to stay standing. I nodded and moved to the kitchen table. The biggest box had fallen open in the move, scattering papers across the floor, lease forms, utility notices, a folder from my old therapist, and one wrinkled envelope I had been too afraid to open for weeks. I bent to pick it up before the edge could catch under his chair. He watched me do it, not with pity, but with the kind of attention that made my hand steadier. "That one," I said quietly, holding up a bill notice, "has the wrong apartment number. If you don't fix it now, they'll keep sending notices to the woman downstairs." He took the paper from me, eyes narrowing just a little. "How do you know?" "Because her name is on the mailbox. I saw it when I came in." He stared at me for a second longer, then took out his phone and sent a message without saying a word. A minute later, somewhere down the hall, footsteps moved fast, then stopped. I looked toward the door just as a soft thud sounded from the hallway. Someone had dropped a stack of mail by the wrong unit and was already correcting it. He saw me notice. "You pay attention," he said. It wasn't praise. It sounded more like a fact he would have to account for now. Before I could answer, my phone lit up again with my ex's name. This time, I didn't grab it. I let it ring until it stopped. When I looked up, he was still watching me, but the distance in his eyes had changed. He reached for the brown envelope from the drawer, slid it halfway open, and then paused. "Tomorrow," he said, "you're coming with me to sign the new building access forms. I want you to see who comes and goes." It wasn't a request. It was a door opening into a world I had not been meant to enter. And for the first time, I understood that the apartment next door was not the safest place in the building. It was the place where decisions were made. When he said I was coming with him to sign the building access forms, I should have said no. I should have retreated behind my new door, locked it, and pretended I had never heard the weight in his voice. Instead, I nodded. My throat was dry, but my voice held. Okay. The word landed between us like a decision, not a courtesy. He studied me for a second, as if measuring whether I understood what I was stepping into, then reached for his coat. Outside his apartment, the hallway lights were too bright and the air felt thinner, like the building itself was holding its breath. We had barely reached the elevator when two men in dark suits appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving with the quiet certainty of people who expected doors to open for them. One of them glanced at me first, then at him, and his expression tightened. "Boss," he said carefully, "the board is already asking why the neighbor is involved." Neighbor. The word was polite. The meaning was not. I felt the shift instantly. This was not a private favor. This was an exposure. A test. He did not look at the men for long. Because she noticed what others missed, he said. Simple. Controlled. Final. The man's jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. That was when I understood what he was doing. He was not offering me protection. He was placing my name inside his risk. The elevator doors opened, and instead of stepping aside, he held them for me with one hand while answering a call with the other. His voice changed only slightly, but I caught it, the tiny rough edge under the calm. "No," he said into the phone after listening for a beat. "She's with me." Then he looked at me, and for 1 second the mask slipped. Not weakness. Something heavier. Responsibility. The kind that keeps a man awake. In the garage, a black car waited with a driver already at the wheel, but before I could get in, I noticed the folder tucked under his arm. The access forms. And on top, a second set of papers stamped with a sealed notice from the building committee. He saw me looking. "They want to limit who can come and go after midnight," he said. "They think rules make them safe." He handed me the folder instead of carrying it himself. "I need someone who can read a room and tell me where the holes are." My pulse jumped. He wasn't asking me to stand beside him. He was asking me to help guard the entrance to his world. It was a smaller job than power. It was more dangerous than power. I took the folder, felt its weight, and understood the cost at once. If I said yes, my life at the edge of his would end. No more pretending I lived across the hall by accident. No more easy escape back to the woman who only watched. The car door stayed open behind me, the city waiting beyond the garage lights. I tightened my grip on the papers and said, "Then I'll come." His eyes held mine, dark and unreadable, and for the first time he looked less like a man who controlled the building than someone who had been carrying it alone. "Good," he said softly. "Then you'll see what it costs." The hallway was unusually quiet when I returned from the leasing office. The elevator doors opened, but instead of hearing televisions behind apartment walls or neighbors greeting each other, I found two maintenance workers replacing one of the security cameras outside my door. One of them looked up, smiled politely, and said they were upgrading the system after a recent incident. I thanked them and walked inside, yet something about the exchange stayed with me. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Smile. The new camera sees everything." My blood ran cold. Attached was a photograph of me standing beside the workers only moments earlier. Before panic could settle in, someone knocked gently on my door. Romano stood outside, his expression calm but sharper than I had ever seen it. "Come with me," he said. "Now." He led me across the hall into his apartment and locked the door behind us. Without saying a word, he placed a tablet on the kitchen counter. Several security feeds filled the screen. One camera replayed the supposed maintenance crew entering the building. Another showed them never carrying any tools inside their cases. A third captured them speaking briefly with a man waiting in a black sedan across the street before disappearing. Romano paused the footage. "They weren't replacing cameras," he said quietly. "They were confirming which apartment was yours." My stomach tightened. "My ex?" I asked. Romano remained silent for a moment before answering. "Not exactly." He opened a secure message on the screen. It contained a short report: former boyfriend located. Contact established through intermediary. Residence confirmed. I stared at the words until they blurred together. "Someone hired him?" I whispered. Romano nodded once. "Your ex thought he was selling an address." His eyes lifted to mine. "He didn't realize he was selling you." Before I could respond, the apartment intercom buzzed. Romano answered without speaking. A calm male voice echoed through the speaker. "Good evening, Mr. Vale. We only came to verify one detail." Romano didn't reply. The voice continued. "Whether the woman next door mattered." Silence stretched between them. Romano finally spoke. "You have your answer." Another pause followed before the man replied, almost respectfully. "Yes. We do." The line disconnected. I felt the room grow smaller around me. "Who are they?" I asked. Romano looked toward the dark window overlooking the city. "People who never attack the fortress," he said quietly. "They look for the one person the man inside refuses to lose." He stepped toward the window and closed the curtains before turning back to me. "Pack what you need for 3 days." I could barely find my voice. "Because my ex knows where I live?" Romano shook his head. "No." His expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. "Because tonight an entire organization learned exactly how to reach me." The drive across the city lasted less than 20 minutes, yet it felt like I was leaving an entire life behind. Romano never turned on the radio. Neither of us spoke. Outside the window, familiar streets slowly disappeared until the car rolled through a pair of iron gates into a quiet estate hidden behind rows of old oak trees. It didn't look like a fortress. That was what made it unsettling. Inside, everything appeared ordinary: warm lights, fresh coffee, books on the shelves, even a blanket folded neatly across the sofa. It looked like a home built for people who had forgotten what safety actually felt like. Romano placed a small key on the table between us. "If you stay here, no one comes in without my permission." I stared at the key but didn't touch it. "And if I leave?" He met my eyes without hesitation. "Someone will find you before morning." My phone vibrated. This time it wasn't my ex. It was my manager. "Don't come to work tomorrow. 2 men were asking about you today." A second message followed from my landlord. "Someone paid 6 months of your lease in cash this afternoon." I assumed it was a relative. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. Everything was happening too neatly. Someone wasn't chasing me anymore. They were quietly erasing every place I could return to. I looked up. "They're closing every door behind me." Romano nodded once. "That's how pressure works. They don't force you to run. They make sure there's nowhere left to stand." Silence settled between us. After a long moment, he slid another object across the table, a simple black phone with no logo, no contacts, no history. "Only 6 people know this number," he said. "If you ever call it, one of us comes." I frowned. Us? For the first time, he allowed himself the smallest smile. The people who still believe loyalty is worth more than power. I picked up the phone. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, but because of what accepting it meant. Romano stood and walked toward the window. You still have a choice, he said quietly. Walk away now, and I'll make sure you disappear somewhere no one will ever find you. I looked at the dark glass reflecting both of us standing in the same room. Would you disappear too? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I finally understood that leaving wouldn't only end whatever existed between us. It would force him to spend the rest of his life wondering whether I was still alive. I placed the phone in my pocket. Then stop giving me ways to leave. He turned slowly. Something changed in his expression, not relief, not victory, but respect. Before either of us could speak again, the secure phone rang. Romano answered immediately. He listened for only a few seconds before every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. He ended the call and looked directly at me. They've found this house. We left the safe house before dawn. The streets were still empty, washed pale beneath the first hint of morning, but every turn the car made felt deliberate, as though someone had planned the route years before I ever existed. Romano drove in silence until the city disappeared behind us and an old stone estate emerged beyond a line of towering cedar trees. A pair of iron gates opened before we reached them. No one asked his name. They already knew. The courtyard was filled with men in dark suits. Conversation stopped the moment Romano stepped out of the car. One after another, they straightened without being told. No applause. No greeting. Only quiet respect. I had never seen power look so silent. Romano walked forward without slowing, and I followed half a step behind. Every pair of eyes shifted toward me. No one smiled. No one questioned why I was there. That frightened me more than hostility ever could. They had already accepted that I mattered. Inside the main hall, a long wooden table stretched beneath a crystal chandelier. Several older men were waiting. One of them pushed a folder across the table. 3 safe houses compromised, he said evenly. 2 businesses under surveillance. 4 of our people followed. He paused before adding, it all began the day she moved in next door. The room fell silent again. I felt every word settle on my shoulders like another stone. Romano never looked at me. Then say what you're really here to say, he replied. The oldest man folded his hands together. Cut all ties with her, and this ends today. No one spoke after that. Even the guards along the walls seemed unwilling to breathe. I looked at Romano, waiting for hesitation. Instead, he slowly removed the heavy silver ring from his right hand and placed it on the table. The sound echoed through the room. If protecting her costs me this seat, he said calmly, someone else can have it. For the first time, disbelief crossed every face around the table. One of the younger captains stood abruptly. Boss, you built this family. Romano's voice remained steady. A family that survives by sacrificing innocent people was never worth building. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. Then something unexpected happened. The young captain stepped forward, picked up the ring, and placed it back in front of Romano. Another man did the same. Then another. One after another, the people in the room rose to their feet without a single command. We stand with our boss, the captain said quietly. The word spread through the hall until every voice joined his. I stood frozen, unable to understand why men who owed him everything were willing to risk losing it alongside him. Romano finally looked at me. There was no triumph in his eyes. Only exhaustion, and relief that he no longer had to fight alone. Before anyone could speak again, the massive front doors burst open. A guard hurried inside, breathing hard. "Boss," he said. "We've intercepted a message." He handed Romano a sealed envelope. Romano opened it, read a single line, and every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. He turned the paper toward me. Across the center, in black ink, were only 7 words. "Your ex is no longer working alone." The first thing I felt was the empty space beside me. Cold. Final. The apartment door was still open, but it no longer felt like a place I belonged. Outside, the hallway lights washed everything in pale gold, and his voice reached me before he did, low, controlled, stripped down to something that hurt more than anger ever could. "You chose your life," he said. "I chose mine." I turned back just enough to see him standing in his doorway, one hand braced against the frame like it was the only thing keeping him upright. No men. No storm. Just him, and the silence he had carried for too long. Then I saw what he was holding. My spare key. The one I had forgotten on his counter days ago. He looked at it for a long moment before placing it on the floor between us, not as an offer, but as a surrender. That was when I understood the shape of everything. He had not been keeping me out. He had been waiting for me to decide whether I could live with the truth of him. The envelope the older man had brought was still on the hallway bench, untouched. I bent down, opened it, and found the lease transfer papers I had signed on the first day, my name beside his building, his signature beside mine, both of them tied together by a clause I had never really understood until now. Not ownership. Protection. He had put the apartment in my name the night I moved in, long before I knew who lived next door, long before anyone came looking for leverage. My chest tightened as the memory landed with a new weight, every locked gate, every warning, every time he stepped back when he wanted to step closer. He had been building distance to keep me safe, and I had mistaken restraint for rejection. My hand shook as I held the papers up. "You never planned to own me," I said, and it came out like a wound opening. His gaze dropped once, then returned to mine. "No," he answered. "I planned to lose you before I hurt you." The words changed the air between us. Not because they erased what came before, but because they finally gave it a name. I crossed the hallway slowly, stopping where the key sat between us. I did not pick it up. Neither did he. We both looked at it like it belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. Then I slid the key back toward him. "I'm not staying because you protected me," I said. "I'm here because you finally let me see the cost." For the first time, he smiled without victory in it. Just grief. Just relief. Just the smallest surrender of a man who had always controlled the room until the one thing he wanted most walked toward him on her own. The elevator chimed softly behind me, and I did not move. Neither did he. But when I looked up, he had stepped back from the frame, leaving the doorway open wide enough for me to choose. He didn't reach for the key. Not this time. He let it stay on the floor between us like a small, shining boundary neither of us had the right to cross again. The hallway was quiet except for the soft hum of the elevator and the rain tapping somewhere far below, and I realized I was waiting for him to tell me what to do. That old instinct. That old fear. But he only looked at me, steady and bare, and said, "If you leave, I won't stop you." The words landed gently. That was what broke me. Not control. Not possession. Choice. I lifted my hand and found the pocket of my coat where I had kept the spare copy of the folder he'd given me, the one with his name, his address, his life folded into black and white paper. I took it out, crossed the space, and placed it against his chest. He looked down at it, then back at me, like he understood exactly what I was giving back. Not the papers. The right to be known and still be left standing. You don't have to guard my door anymore, I whispered. His throat moved once. He nodded, slow and certain, then did the one thing I never thought I would see from a man like him. He stepped aside. Not away from me. For me. I passed him, and when I reached my apartment, I stopped with my hand on the knob because the silence behind me felt different now, less like a threat, more like a witness. Then I turned back and found him still there, no longer blocking the hall, only holding the space like a promise he had finally learned to keep. Downstairs, when the front entry chimed, a young mother with a torn grocery bag froze under the lobby lights, trying to gather oranges rolling across the marble. Before I could move, he was already there, kneeling to help her, one hand steadying the bag while the other nudged a fallen fruit toward her child's waiting arms. He smiled at the little boy with the same careful warmth he had once hidden from the world, and for the first time, I saw it, the power that had once made everyone fear him now making room for someone else to feel safe. When he looked up and caught me watching, he didn't claim the moment. He simply held the door open. I walked back down the hall, took the folder from him again, and this time he let me keep it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The glass on the lobby doors reflected two figures standing side by side, neither of us reaching for the other, both of us finally still.